Governments across the world, operating under the control of the World Economic Forum, are waging war on our children. Klaus Schwab's young global leaders are systematically attempting to normalize paedophilia and decriminalize sex with children across the world. It's happening right before our very eyes, and the mainstream media are complicit in their silence. This week, in Jacinda Ardern's far-left New Zealand, a judge declared that 12-year-old children can consent to sex with adults. No need to hit rewind, you heard me correctly. The case in question features a 45-year-old man whose defence centred on the claim that his 12-year-old victim wanted it. According to the middle-aged man, the 12-year-old girl pressured him for sex. I know she was a child, but the way she came to me was like a mature woman. I refused her, but she kept coming back to me. She truly wanted to do this, the 45-year-old said of the child, who was 12 at the time. In the final days of the trial, Judge Earworker addressed the issue of consent for a person under 16 years. Legally, a person under 16 cannot give consent for charges of indecent acts. Therefore, as a jury, all you need to decide is if the indecent acts took place, he said. Then came the kicker. He told the jury, but as for sexual intercourse, a person under 16 can give consent. You need to consider whether or not the consent was given based on the evidence you have. On Monday, Judge Earworker closed the trial, urging the jury to stay utterly dispassionate when judging whether the Crown prosecution had proved its case or not. Keep in mind, we're talking about a man who confessed to having sex with a 12-year-old and justified it on the grounds that she wanted it. The judge said, "It is not enough for the Crown to persuade you that he is most likely guilty. It needs to be beyond a reasonable doubt." Scary times in New Zealand, but are you surprised? We're talking about a far-left authoritarian state led by young global leader Jacinda Ardern, where citizens are being told to put their total trust in government.
We will continue to be your single source of truth. We will provide information frequently. We will share everything we can, everything else you see, a grain of salt.
New Zealand has fallen, but they're not the only ones. Emmanuel Macron was re-elected as President of France earlier this year in an election widely regarded as suspect. It's perhaps no surprise that he is also one of Klaus Schwab's young global leaders, and France is also normalizing paedophilia. President Macron's government voted against having an age of consent in France in 2018, becoming one of the first nations to give in to pressure from an international cabal determined to decriminalize sex with children across the world. This means federal law in France has no legal age of consent, and adults who have sex with children of any age will not be prosecuted for rape if the child victim is unable to prove violence, threat, duress, or surprise. The bill against sexual and gender-based violence was signed into law on the 3rd of August, sparking outrage in France as parents and children's rights groups accused Macron's government of betraying the nation's children. The lack of an age of consent places millions of children in serious danger of sexual abuse in France, according to child protection officials. If anything, that's an understatement. But should they be surprised? Like Jacinda Ardern of New Zealand, Macron is one of Klaus Schwab's young global leaders. They are all hell-bent on waging a war against our children. Love him or loathe him, Russian President Vladimir Putin warned us years ago that the global elite plan to normalize paedophilia in the West. According to Putin, the global elite engage in Satan worship. Do as thou wilt is their motto. It appears he was correct. I said earlier that the mainstream media is complicit in its silence. More interested in promoting big pharma products and acting as the PR department of the Democratic Party, the media appears completely uninterested in real-world issues that have a direct influence on the lives of our children. But when you scratch the surface, you realise the media is complicit in more ways than simply turning a blind eye. The attempt to normalise paedophilia has been playing out before our very eyes for years. And who better to desensitise the masses than their favourite stars?
Somebody you admire, somebody you respect, or maybe even love. And it feels good. I mean, if you're 7 years old and somebody, which I was trying to say this to my friends who had children, you're 7 years old and someone is stroking your penis, it feels good. Right. Even though you don't have a name for what that is, it feels good. And when I first said this years ago, people were like, you're crazy, because everybody wants to believe it's like sexual assault and you're being thrown up against the wall and you're being raped. And I have said for years, if the abuser is any good, you won't even know it's happened.
Oprah has been taking every opportunity to quietly and deceptively undermine traditional family values for years now. According to Bill Maher, a relationship between a 30-something and a 12-year-old child is totally fine, and society should stop being so uptight.
On the cover, Mary Kay Letourneau, the teacher from Seattle, who is in jail because she is in love. That's how I view it. I admit that it's unorthodox. She is 35. The boy is 14. He was younger when they started. But the big story this week.
Has he been bar mitzvahed?
Have I?
No, is he?
Oh. Okay. But she is pregnant again. That was the story this week. With the second child by this boy. So basically they're having a family and they're keeping the mother in jail because she won't conform to what society feels should be the perfect American family.
Yeah, it's perfect. My dad's 14 years old older than me.
Absolutely sickening.
What is sickening?
A woman who's over 20 years older and she raped this kid.
Raped?
Well.
Come on. She forced? How do you know? And how can you?
Well, how do you know that she didn't rape him?
How can a woman
know that she didn't seduce him?
How can a woman rape a man?
I think that an older woman can manipulate a young kid, and I don't think it's really healthy. I don't think it's healthy for a kid who's going to be 14 with 2 kids out in the world. I think those children will grow up fairly damaged. I think that kid's going to grow up fairly damaged.
So you're on her side?
Yeah.
Okay.
And obviously, CNN takes every opportunity to slip in some pro-pedophilia content among the rest of the trash they peddle. According to the network's chief legal analyst, Jeffrey Toobin, who was suspended briefly for masturbating live on a Zoom call in 2020, paedophiles caught with child pornography should get lighter sentences these days because the internet made them do it. You can't make this stuff up.
Can I just add one point about these kiddie porn cases? And this came up, I remember, when I was an assistant U.S. attorney back in the 90s, is that when those sentencing guidelines were written for those cases, this was a time when the people who committed these crimes would order individual photos and then get them usually through email. And then they would be sentenced based on the number of photos they possessed. This was all pre-internet. So once the internet came in and people got access to hundreds and then thousands of photos, the sentencing guidelines would reflect hundreds and then thousands of photos. Federal judges have been struggling with the issue of how do you create a fair system that was designed pre-internet that was, yet you have to sentence people post-internet. And what I thought Chairman Durbin pointed out is that judges across the country, including Republican-appointed judges, have been saying, look, we can't apply the rules that were designed pre-internet for an internet society. And many judges have been giving somewhat less sentences as a result. And I thought that was a very clear explanation of why Judge Jackson imposed sentences that were all prison sentences. It wasn't like she was letting these people go, but they were somewhat less than the guidelines because the guidelines had not been adapted for the internet era.
We haven't even got to the head of the snake yet. Hollywood, the entertainment industry. Responsible for brainwashing the masses for decades, Hollywood is widely understood to be controlled by satanic paedophiles. Meet John Paul Rice. He's an LA-based film producer. According to Rice, the entertainment industry is run by elite paedophiles who traffic and sacrifice children for their own depraved pleasure. And most of these kids don't live beyond 7 or 8 years old.
The media corporations, the most powerful 6 corporations in the land, in the world for that matter, are all implicated in human trafficking of kids. And I would point to anybody who wants to know more about that to look at Project Veritas and the leak disclosure of off-air footage of Amy Robach from ABC News when she found out and was discussing in 2016 that they had everything from Virginia Giuffre, all of it. Everybody who was involved, they had all the evidence. Their own lawyers said that when all is said and done, Jeffrey Epstein will go down as one of the most prolific pedophiles in all of history, and they buried that story to have access to the royal family, for which we now know Prince Andrew was implicated. They did not have any remorse for the victims in that video. This is a bigger problem because most people know in that world, and the world that I come from in Hollywood, that it is a hidden layer that everybody knows is there. When the Me Too movement started in 2017, I reached out to several of my female actress friends who were prominent in LA. You would know them by name. Many of them you would know by just their look, because you go, oh, that was her in that movie or that movie. And I said, well, what about the children? What about the children? And the response was, we know. But they were silent on it. And it destroyed me because it destroyed my illusion of what rights, human rights were, children's rights were. This is a child abuse system that we have been living in for a very long time, and it's been allowed to go on. And I will not be silent about this because it affects every single one of us. The people on television who smile at you, who tell you stories, who give you news, are the ones who hide all of this from us.
Damning stuff. If you want to live in a world that's safe for our children, it's time to make a stand.